You may ask why I'm dressed in a Renaissance kind of fashion. Well, I want to talk about the music of the Renaissance today. Actually, not just the Renaissance and most Western European music predating the Renaissance. See, whenever I arrange pieces of music from that time span that actually were created back then, written back then, I usually get these kind of comments.
I might dislike this in comparison to the original, dear Fire. So any reason why you made another version in another scale?
By original, you probably mean a specific version on YouTube you personally enjoy. Palestine Elite isn't a Britney Spears song or an Elvis song with one original recording that other artists cover. It's a melody with lyrics written down in the Middle Ages, and people have been doing different arrangements for 1,000 years, using different instruments, different rhythm, different tempo, etc., because there is no original version of the song. All we have from the Middle Ages is the written down melody and the lyrics, no other indications on instrumentation, tempo, speed, etc. Whatever version you believe to be the original is just one arrangement among the hundreds that have been made over the centuries, and it's no more the canonical one than mine is.
You went back to teach us. Can you ask the composer of Chevalier Malt Estes why is there a difference between your and Master Jordi Savall rendition and lyrics? Not the same writer maybe.
Now, the notion that there are original versions, which means original arrangements effectively of songs, is a product of our modern culture, if you will. It's a projection, an anachronistic projection of our reality, wherein we have recordings. You know, Elvis did a recording, and that's the original recording. Due to recording technology, the ability to etch into our minds a specific arrangement forever that will always be replayable, due to that has created the idea that there is an original version of songs, but that's simply something that was not possible back then. Now, you may say, well, okay, they did not have original recordings, so sure, you don't really have an original recording of the Palestine Elite, but they would have had original arrangements that they would have written down with instructions. And the problem is, again, before really the Baroque era, this wasn't that much of a thing. The idea culturally, the cultural reflex that songs, a specific piece of music, whether it's a song or it's instrumental, should have a specific arrangement attached to it, is something that really comes about in the era of Viennese classicism. See, with the advent of Viennese classicism, you get this notion that I want 2 pianos here, 4 violins here, a contrabass here. This contrabass does this ornamentation. This piano does that thing. And this creates effectively arrangements that are written down. And so the sonatas of Mozart, for example, there's a very clear idea where this is the original version, this is the original arrangement, and anything that's ever done will be relative to it, will be a derivative work from it, will be a deviation from the original. So starting from Viennese classicism, we can talk about a notion of original arrangements or versions of songs. But before that, the cultural mindset was simply that, you know, you're Guillaume de Machaut, you write down Douce Dame Jolie. Maybe once it's played with a drum and a bagpipe and it's instrumental, maybe another time it's completely vocal and a cappella, and every time the vocals will be ornamenting differently. I've talked at length about how medieval music was effectively based on the idea that every single performance will be fundamentally different. In this regard, Western European music was fundamentally more like the classical forms of the Middle East or of, you know, India, etc., than it is current Western European musical practices. Another problem also is this idea that folk songs can have an original arrangement, because at least when you have Douce Dame Jolie and everything, it's a song that somebody composed at a certain time. But folk songs are even more complicated, because the way that folk songs form in the first place, you know, people don't sit down and somebody wrote down the folk song for the first time and that's how it worked. You look at Ralani Ralaziani, for example, it's a Greek song. You know, the thing is, Ghalani Ghalaziani, is there an original version? It's difficult to say because probably what we know as Ghalani Ghalaziani might go back a few generations back, and it was a certain piece of music that had a certain kind of melody, and then somebody from that village went into another village, lived there 40 years, and over 40 years he kind of forgot the original melody, and so he kind of switched the notes, and then his son, who was a Byzantine cantor, kind of sang Ghalani Ghalaziani, and unknowingly he kind of began incorporating melodic elements from one of the hymns that he was used to. And so folk songs, they, you know, it's like, I don't know how like the moon was formed. The moon wasn't just formed like this, just here's a plan and then we build it. It was rocks smashing into each other for eons upon eons upon eons. And eventually at a certain point, you know, you get something that looks like the moon, but it's this incremental kind of process where it just keeps adding to itself, you know, over and over and over again. And so basically, the whole point of trying to find an original version of Ghalani Ghalaziani is just, it doesn't make sense, because as you go back in time, it was just incrementally building off of other melodic processes and melodic works that existed before it. It's kind of like the idea of the, you know, they call it the homeland of a language family in linguistics. They say, what is the homeland of Uralic or Indo-European? The problem is, well, that's always going to be relative. That's always going to be arbitrary, because sure, you know, did it originate here? Well, that's not where the language occurred in the first place. That same language, Proto-Indo-European, was itself a language from another language family that precedes it, that goes before. And so that came from somewhere else. And so the idea of the original homeland of language is always going to be fundamentally arbitrary. And I think the same applies to folk music. Now, the last aspect that I want to talk about at the end of this video is what I call the gladiator effect. Now, what is the gladiator effect? The gladiator effect is this thing where you play this theme from the movie Gladiator called the Gladiator Waltz. And I've done this test with over 100 people over the last 10 years. And all of them, without any exception, have always said the same thing. Gladiator copied Pirates of the Caribbean. That's the interesting thing. That's always the reaction. If they recognize the Pirates of the Caribbean theme, they always assume that it's Gladiator that copied Pirates of the Caribbean. None of them ever assume that it's the opposite. Why couldn't it be the opposite? That's what I call the gladiator effect. The gladiator effect is this thing where the first time these people heard that melody was in Pirates of the Caribbean, therefore they just assumed that it must be from Pirates of the Caribbean. But the thing is, Gladiator came before Pirates of the Caribbean. It's Hans Zimmer who wrote both themes. He plagiarized himself off of the earlier work from Gladiator. But the problem is, people always assume Pirates of the Caribbean came first because that's where they heard it first. In other words, the gladiator effect is this cognitive bias in which the first context in which we discovered something, we just assume that it is the origin of that thing. It sounds weird, but we do think like that. It's as if I saw dolphins for the first time in Greece, therefore I'm going to assume that they originated in Greece. And we actually do that without thinking. And so when you get to folk songs, for example, you have Ghalani Ghalaziani again, one of the versions says, Me kalese mi archonisa, another says, Me minise mi archonisa. And you have Greeks fighting over it, saying, that's the original. No, that's the original. It's like, unless you can prove that one precedes the other, which, good luck, you can't with folk songs, you know, how do you define what's original? And the thing is, the only reason they're saying that one is original is that's the one I grew up with. Therefore, it's the original version. Gladiator effect. What we were used to first, the first place where we were familiarized with something, we take for account that it's the origin, basically. It's the same thing with the comment about the Song of Palestine. Why do they assume that whatever version they heard is the original just because it's the first one that they heard personally? And so I think these are the three main ingredients in creating this idea that there are original versions to music. You know, this projection of the idea of recordings that we have today that give us now, today, very much an idea that there is an original version of music, of pieces of music. And then secondly, the idea that we project arrangements that are now sort of, normal in Western European music. And starting from Viennese classicism, you arrange a piece of music like this. All of the Mahler sonatas must be played exactly like this. That didn't exist back then. And finally, the gladiator effect. I think when you put all these three together, you get this sort of misconception, if you will. This was Fari Fergi. I hope you found the talk interesting. Now, if you could please get out of here and just leave me to meditate alone in this beautiful Anglican church, I would be most grateful. So please, just go. Thank you. Bye. Turn around one last time just to show the... Oh no, oh no, oh no!